When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I didn't cry. I smiled instead, not because I wasn't hurt, but because I had learned to hide the pain, to swallow it quietly, to keep my heart steady even when the world shook around me. She said it like it was ordinary, like she was reading from a list. "You're the problem in his life. I can't have you here anymore." I remember the words echoing in my head long after she left the room. I remember the sound of my own heartbeat, loud and trembling, in the quiet kitchen. My hands were wrapped around a cup of tea that had gone cold. I could feel the warmth of the liquid, but it did nothing to warm the hollow ache inside. I had loved her. I had treated her like my own daughter. I had shared my home, my traditions, my stories, my recipes, even the little secrets of our family. I had believed that family meant love, respect, and a place for everyone. But that day, I learned how quickly that belief could shatter. I wanted to shout, to plead, to ask why. But the words caught in my throat. Instead, I said quietly, "If that's what you think, I will leave." And I walked out as quietly as I could, leaving behind the home I had built, not just with bricks and walls, but with love. As I closed the door, I felt a strange mix of grief and relief. Grief for the family I thought I had, and relief because finally, the tension that had been growing, unspoken but present in every glance and every word, was named. It existed. And now, at least, I knew where I stood. It was only later, as I sat in my empty living room, listening to the rain tapping gently against the windows, that I began to understand something about life. That even when love is real, even when care is deep, misunderstandings, insecurities, and pride can twist hearts against each other. And sometimes, even the closest bonds are tested in ways we never expect. I had always tried to be a good mother. My son, Arjun, was my world. From the day he was born, I devoted myself to his happiness, to his growth, to the little joys that made childhood gentle and secure. Our home was small, but warm. The walls were painted in soft shades of cream and yellow, and there was a window in the living room where sunlight poured in each morning. I loved to sit there with him, sipping chai, sharing quiet mornings before the world woke up fully. Arjun was a thoughtful boy. He loved reading, playing in the garden, and helping me in small ways. He had always been sensitive, caring, and affectionate. And I had always tried to nurture that, never wanting to impose, but always ready to support him whenever he stumbled. When he met Priya, I was excited. She was lively, cheerful, with bright eyes that seemed to smile before her mouth even moved. I welcomed her into our home with open arms. I showed her family recipes, shared our little traditions, and introduced her to the neighbors, the local markets, the festivals. I even helped her with small adjustments, teaching her how we celebrated birthdays, how we maintained our small rituals, how we talked and laughed around the dinner table. At first, everything felt natural. We laughed together. We celebrated festivals. We cooked together. I thought that love, patience, and kindness would guide us through any small differences. But slowly, I noticed subtle changes. Priya would make quiet remarks about how things were done differently, or how I didn't understand modern ways. At first, I brushed them off. I told myself, she's new, she's adjusting. Every new daughter-in-law goes through a phase. Arjun, my son, tried to reassure me. He would smile and say, "Mom, don't take it personally. She's just figuring things out." I nodded and kept my heart calm, hoping that time would smooth over the little bumps. Yet, the tension was there, growing silently, like a shadow that stretches across the walls at sunset. Conversations became shorter. Laughter became forced. Simple gestures, like offering to cook together or help with chores, were met with polite avoidance or cold thanks. I began to feel the first tiny cracks in the bond I had thought unbreakable. One afternoon, I offered to help Priya with the kitchen while Arjun was at work. I tried to fold the vegetables neatly, prepared the spices carefully. She barely acknowledged my presence, her hands moving faster, speaking in clipped sentences. "I've got this, Mom. You don't need to do it this way." I nodded, smiling softly. "Of course, dear. Just thought I could help." She looked at me once, eyes narrowed slightly, then returned to her task. That moment felt like the first true shift in our relationship. The first time I realized that kindness could be misinterpreted, that love could be seen as interference. Days turned into weeks, and the small cracks I had noticed began to feel heavier. Even simple visits to their home started to make me anxious. I remember one afternoon when I went over to bring some fresh fruits. Arjun greeted me with a quick hug and said, "Thanks, Mom." But Priya barely glanced up from her phone. She said, "You can leave them on the counter." The tone was flat, almost dismissive. I felt a flutter of hurt but didn't let it show. I simply nodded, set the basket down, and smiled softly. I reminded myself that patience was my way forward, that love was about giving space, not just demanding attention. Still, there were moments of warmth. Arjun would try to include me in small ways, sharing his day, asking for advice, or telling me about work. And in those moments, I felt comforted, thinking maybe, just maybe, things were normalizing. I often thought back to the years when Arjun was a child, how he would run into my arms after a bad day at school, how we would sit by the window in the evening, watching the rain, sharing stories of our dreams. Those memories were my anchor, reminding me why I had loved him so fiercely and why I believed in family. Even Priya had moments of kindness. There were evenings when she would help me set the table, or when she smiled at a joke I made. But those moments were fleeting, like sunlight through a cloudy sky. They didn't last long enough to overshadow the coldness that had started creeping into our home. One day, I noticed a change in Arjun too. He seemed quieter, more hesitant. I could see him caught in the middle, trying to balance his loyalty toward me and his desire to keep peace with his wife. I would often catch him looking at me with a sad expression, one that said, "I don't want to hurt anyone." But the tension between Priya and me grew stronger. There were small disagreements about trivial matters: where to place the curtains, how to organize the kitchen, how to celebrate birthdays. Each tiny disagreement felt like a small wound, and over time, those wounds started to sting more sharply. I tried talking to her gently. "Priya, if I'm doing something wrong, please tell me. I only want to help, not interfere." She looked at me. Her lips pressed tightly together and said, "You always think you know best. Sometimes it's better if you just step back." Her words cut deeper than I expected. I felt my heart ache, but I didn't respond with anger. Instead, I quietly nodded and withdrew a little. I tried to create space, thinking that perhaps this was what was needed. Weeks passed. I stopped coming over as often. I stopped offering advice. I even reduced my calls to check on them, trying to respect their space. But even then, the coldness persisted. I could feel it in the way Priya spoke to Arjun in front of me, in the way my presence seemed to be ignored. It was during one of those quiet evenings, sitting alone by my window with a cup of tea, that I realized something important. Sometimes love isn't enough to bridge the gap if the other person is determined to push you away. And yet, I also realized that giving up entirely wasn't my way. I had to find patience, strength, and understanding to navigate this new reality. The first major confrontation happened on a rainy afternoon. I had gone over to drop off some clothes I had washed and folded for them. The rain was soft, pattering on the roof, creating a sense of calm that I wished could extend to our home. I entered the kitchen, where Priya was busy preparing lunch. I smiled gently, holding the folded clothes. "I thought I'd bring these. I washed and folded them for you." Priya glanced up, her eyes cold. "You don't need to do that. I can manage." I paused, trying to keep my tone soft. "Of course, dear. I just thought it would help." She didn't respond. I could feel the tension rising. Her silence was loud, almost suffocating. I tried to make small talk, asking about her day, offering a smile, but she seemed determined to keep me at a distance. Arjun came home soon after, sensing the tension. He said softly, "Mom, it's okay. Let's just sit in the living room." He tried to ease the moment, but even his presence couldn't soften the atmosphere. That evening, after they'd gone to bed, I reflected on what had happened. I remembered small events I had overlooked. The subtle comments, the dismissive tones, the way Priya seemed uncomfortable whenever I was around. I realized the cracks were no longer small. They were widening, and I was unsure if they could ever be repaired. A few days later, I overheard Priya talking to a neighbor on the phone. She said quietly but firmly, "Your mother-in-law is making things difficult. I can't have her around all the time. It's too much." Hearing her words, my heart sank. I had done nothing but love them. I had tried to nurture a bond, to create a home filled with warmth, and yet, I was being labeled a problem. The tension grew worse over the following weeks. Small gestures of kindness from my side were met with impatience. Attempts to join in family conversations were ignored. Even Arjun seemed torn, caught between loyalty to me and his desire to avoid conflict with his wife. One evening, I tried to speak to him privately. "Arjun, I feel like there's a distance growing between us. Please tell me if I've done something wrong." He looked at me, guilt shadowing his eyes. Mom, it's not you. It's complicated. Priya feels overwhelmed sometimes. I don't know how to fix it. I nodded silently, understanding his dilemma, but the ache in my heart grew heavier. I had tried to step back, to give them space, but it seemed that my presence, my love, and even my memories with Arjun were seen as intrusions. Then came the letter. Priya had written to me, not to apologize or explain, but to state clearly that she wanted me to give them space, to stay away from their home. I held the letter in my hands, feeling the paper tremble as if it carried the weight of all the months of coldness, avoidance, and silent accusations. Reading her words, I realized that the situation had escalated beyond what I could control. I had to make a choice. Fight for my place in their lives, or step back for the sake of peace. I chose the latter, though it broke me inside. Packing my belongings and leaving their home felt like leaving a part of my soul behind. Every photograph, every little memento of our shared life felt heavy with memories. I carried them quietly, silently, feeling the rain outside mirror the tears I refused to shed. It was a quiet afternoon, the kind where the sunlight slants softly through the windows, and everything seems almost peaceful. I had gone over to their home, carrying a small basket of food I had prepared. The house smelled faintly of spices and curry, and for a moment, I allowed myself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there could still be a normal day. Priya was in the kitchen, her back to me, speaking to someone on the phone. I set the basket down carefully, trying not to disturb her. I thought I'd bring some lunch, I said softly. She turned toward me slowly, eyes cold. Mom, I think it's better if you leave. I blinked. My heart froze. For a moment, I didn't even understand the words. Then they sank in. My hands, which had been adjusting the basket, trembled slightly. I wanted to say something, anything, to ask her why, to tell her she was wrong, to plead. But no words came. I swallowed, forcing my voice to remain steady. If that's what you think, I will go. She didn't respond. She only looked at me, her expression unreadable, and then returned to her phone call. I turned toward the living room, collecting my belongings. The silence that stretched between us was heavier than any words could have been. Each step I took felt like walking on fragile glass. I wanted to cry, to shout, to demand that my son stop this, that he defend me, but Arjun wasn't there. He was at work. And I realized, with a bitter ache, that I couldn't rely on anyone else to protect my heart. Packing was slower than I expected. Every shirt, every photograph, every little memento I had kept over the years carried memories I couldn't simply leave behind. I handled each item carefully, running my fingers over the edges, remembering the laughter, the celebrations, the quiet evenings we had spent together. When I finally stepped out of their house, the sky was overcast. Rain had started falling in gentle sheets. I held my umbrella, feeling the water drip onto my shoes, feeling the coldness of the world match the emptiness in my chest. I walked slowly, letting the tears that I refused to shed in front of them fall quietly onto the pavement. The first night away from my son's home was the hardest. I stayed with an old friend, someone who had always been there in small, quiet ways. She offered me a cup of tea, a warm blanket, and a listening ear. But no matter how much comfort she gave, I felt the hollow space in my heart where my family should have been. I spent the night replaying everything I had done, every smile, every effort, every kind gesture that had been met with coldness or rejection. I questioned myself endlessly. Had I interfered too much? Had I loved too openly? Had I failed my son in some way that made him blind to the hurt I felt? The next few days were a blur. I kept in touch with Arjun, but only cautiously. Each phone call was measured. Each word weighed. He spoke gently, apologetically. But I could sense the tension in his voice. He tried to explain, to justify, to say that Priya was under stress, that she hadn't meant the words in the way they sounded. I listened, but I didn't respond fully. My heart was fragile. I realized that listening didn't always mean agreeing. It meant holding space for understanding, even when my own heart was breaking. Weeks passed. I wrote letters that I never expected to send at first. I poured my heart onto paper, explaining how much I loved them, how much I had tried, how much it hurt to be pushed away. I wrote about my memories of Arjun's childhood, the small joys and the milestones, the laughter and the quiet moments that had shaped our bond. Finally, I sent the letters. I wasn't sure if Priya or even Arjun would read them. I wasn't sure if they would understand, but sending them felt like releasing a weight I had carried silently for too long. When Priya finally responded, it wasn't immediate, and it wasn't perfect. She came over one evening, eyes softened, voice hesitant. I didn't realize how much I hurt you, she said. I thought I was protecting Arjun, but I see now I was wrong. I listened. I didn't interrupt. I didn't smile falsely. I simply allowed myself to feel the wave of emotion that rose and fell like the tide. Grief, relief, and the quiet beginnings of hope. Arjun watched us in silence. I could see the guilt in his eyes, the realization of the pain he had allowed, the regret of not stepping in sooner. I wanted to rush into his arms, to tell him everything was okay, but I held myself back. Healing couldn't be rushed. Trust couldn't be forced. We began slowly. Small gestures, careful conversations, shared meals where words were soft and deliberate. Nothing was rushed. Nothing was forced. I began to understand that forgiveness isn't about forgetting. It isn't about pretending the hurt didn't happen. It is about choosing to move forward, step by step, with awareness and care. I also learned something I hadn't realized before. That self-worth isn't only defined by others. That even when you are pushed away, even when love is tested, you can still find strength and dignity in the choices you make. The months that followed were filled with small milestones. A shared cup of tea without tension, a quiet walk in the garden together, laughter over old memories. The bond between us didn't return to what it had been, not immediately. But it became real again. Cautious, careful, and meaningful. And I learned, finally, that sometimes the hardest moments are the ones that teach us the most. Betrayal doesn't define the entirety of a relationship. Pain doesn't erase love. Time, patience, and quiet courage can slowly rebuild what was broken. The days after Priya's visit were quiet, but filled with small changes. I didn't rush into their lives. I didn't expect immediate warmth or affection. Instead, I allowed time to do what words alone could not. I focused on myself, my own space, and my own reflection. I realized that stepping back had been necessary, not as punishment, but as a way to allow space for everyone's emotions to settle. I spent hours sitting by the window in my friend's home, looking out at the trees swaying in the gentle breeze. I thought about the past, about Arjun as a little boy, about the evenings we had spent reading stories, about the first time he called me mom with complete trust in his voice. Those memories were bittersweet now, but they reminded me why I had loved so fiercely, and why I needed to find patience to navigate this new chapter. Then, gradually, small gestures began to happen. Arjun would call more often, asking about my day, or sharing small victories from work. Priya started sending messages that weren't sharp or distant, but soft, careful, sometimes even humorous. I noticed the subtle change, but I didn't rush to judge or respond with expectation. Healing, I reminded myself, couldn't be forced. The first real sign of reconciliation came on a rainy afternoon. I was at their home, helping Arjun with some paperwork, when Priya brought in a cup of tea. She didn't speak at first, just handed it to me with a tentative smile. I took it, feeling the warmth of the cup in my hands and the warmth of her gesture in my heart. Thanks, I said softly. She looked at me for a long moment, as if measuring whether trust could return. Then she said quietly, I didn't understand before. I didn't see how much you gave, how much you cared. I'm sorry. I nodded, feeling a lump in my throat. It's okay, I whispered. I know it wasn't easy for you either. Arjun, watching us, finally spoke with the voice I had been longing to hear for months. Mom, I'm sorry I didn't see it sooner. I should have defended you. I should have stopped it from going this far. I reached out and held his hand. I know, Arjun, and I'm not angry. I only want us to understand each other. The following weeks were a slow process of rebuilding. We shared meals again, but this time with careful conversation, gentle laughter, and soft understanding. I learned to recognize the moments where Priya needed space, and she began to recognize the moments where I needed acknowledgement. We created a rhythm, small, deliberate, but real. I also took time to reflect on myself. I realized that part of the pain had come from losing sight of my own needs. I had poured myself entirely into my son and his family, sometimes forgetting that I was a person with my own feelings and boundaries. Through this process, I learned that love doesn't mean losing yourself. It means caring deeply while maintaining respect for your own heart. There were moments of doubt, of course. Moments when Priya would snap or withdraw, and I would feel the old ache in my chest. But instead of retreating entirely, I learned to pause, breathe, and respond with calm understanding. Over time, even the small misunderstandings lost their sting. One evening, we were all sitting together after dinner. The rain tapped softly on the window, and the warm light from the lamps filled the room. Arjun shared a story from his office, and Priya laughed genuinely. I smiled quietly, feeling a swell of emotion. Not relief, not joy exactly, but a quiet, steady peace. The bond was fragile, yes, but it was alive. I began to see Priya not as someone who had betrayed me, but as someone who had struggled, as someone learning, as someone trying to find her place in our lives. I realized that holding on to resentment would only prolong pain. Reconciliation didn't mean forgetting the past. It meant acknowledging it and choosing to move forward with awareness. I also realized something about myself. I had learned resilience. I had learned that my heart could bend without breaking completely. I had learned that even in betrayal, there was room for growth, for compassion, for understanding. I could love without being hurt again, because I understood the boundaries of human imperfection. Over time, our home began to feel like a home again. Laughter returned, slowly, cautiously. Small traditions restarted: tea in the morning, shared chores, storytelling at night. The tension that had once been like a heavy fog lifted, replaced with a cautious but steady warmth. The experience changed me. I no longer measured my worth by how others treated me. I no longer allowed fear or resentment to dictate my emotions. I understood that love is not about control, or constant approval, or perfect harmony. Love is about patience, understanding, and the quiet courage to keep caring, even when it's difficult. And most importantly, I realized that relationships, even the most fragile ones, can survive hardship if approached with honesty, humility, and empathy. Betrayal may hurt, silence may weigh heavily, and hearts may ache. But with care, time, and reflection, trust can be rebuilt, and bonds can grow stronger than before. Today, our home feels different. It isn't perfect, and it isn't the same as it was before the rift, but it is alive with a quiet, steady warmth. I have learned to see Priya not just as my daughter-in-law, but as someone who has grown alongside us, learning the hard lessons that family life sometimes demands. And I have learned to see my son, Arjun, as someone who, despite mistakes, loves deeply and is capable of understanding and change. I often sit by the window in the evenings, sipping my tea, listening to the gentle hum of our lives. The rain taps softly on the roof sometimes, or the breeze moves the curtains, and in these moments, I feel peace. The tension that once haunted every corner of our home has faded, replaced with careful attention, respect, and the quiet effort to understand one another. I think about the day she told me I was the problem in their lives. I remember the coldness, the ache, the confusion, and I also remember how I walked away quietly, holding on to my dignity, my love, and my patience. That moment, painful as it was, taught me something invaluable. That love alone isn't always enough, but love paired with courage, patience, and understanding can survive even the hardest trials. Rebuilding our relationship hasn't been simple. There are still moments of misunderstanding, moments when old habits surface, or old fears whisper. But now, I approach them differently. I listen more. I speak gently. I pause before reacting. I remind myself that everyone carries their own struggles, and that empathy can bridge even the widest divides. I've also learned the importance of valuing myself. My worth is not determined by how others treat me, or whether I am fully accepted at all times. My worth comes from the love I give, the patience I nurture, and the kindness I hold in my heart. And from that space of self-respect, I can love freely without fear, without expectation, and without losing myself. Family is fragile, yes, but it is also resilient. Bonds can be tested, hearts can be wounded, and misunderstandings can stretch into long months of distance and silence. Yet with time, reflection, and the courage to face emotions honestly, healing can come. Relationships that seem broken beyond repair can slowly mend, becoming stronger and more authentic than ever before. As I sit here now, watching Arjun and Priya talk softly over dinner plans, I feel gratitude, not just for the moments of laughter and warmth, but for the lessons learned in the silence, the tears, and the distance. I am grateful for the opportunity to love deeply, to be tested, and to emerge with patience, understanding, and a quiet strength I hadn't known I possessed. If there is one thing I hope my story shares, it is this: Love is not always easy, and family is not always simple. There will be moments of betrayal, misunderstanding, and heartbreak. But if you face those moments with patience, empathy, and courage, there is always a path forward. Trust can be rebuilt, hearts can be softened, and connections can become even more meaningful than they were before. I have learned that even when the world feels cold, even when the people you love seem distant, there is still hope. There is still room for warmth, for understanding, and for reconciliation. And most importantly, there is always room for love. The kind of love that heals, endures, and quietly transforms everything it touches.